The smell of garlic and fresh bread filled the air as Elena wiped down another table at Giovanni's restaurant. Her feet ached from standing for 12 hours straight, but she couldn't afford to slow down. The dinner rush was just beginning, and every tip mattered when you're trying to keep your family afloat. At 25, Elena had calluses on her hands from carrying heavy trays and dark circles under her eyes from working 2 jobs. But she never complained. Not when her little brother needed another surgery. Not when the medical bills kept piling up like autumn leaves. She had learned to smile through the exhaustion, to be invisible when customers were rude, and to dream quietly about the life she used to have. Giovanni's wasn't just any restaurant. It sat in the heart of the city's financial district, where men in expensive suits made deals over wine that cost more than Elena's monthly rent. The dining room had marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and a beautiful black piano that sat silent in the corner most nights. The regular pianist had quit last month, saying the owner didn't pay enough. Since then, the piano had become just another piece of furniture, gathering dust and memories. Elena remembered the first time she saw that piano. Her heart had skipped a beat. The instrument was a Steinway, the kind she used to practice on during her conservatory days, before life happened, before her father died and left them with nothing but debt, before her brother got sick and needed treatments they couldn't afford, before music became a luxury she couldn't afford to think about. She had trained for 15 years, starting when she was just 5 years old. Her fingers knew every scale, every chord progression. She could play Chopin blindfolded and Mozart from memory. Her teacher said she had a gift, that she could make it as a professional musician. But gifts don't pay hospital bills. The restaurant was getting busier now. Friday nights always brought the wealthy crowd, people who spent more on one meal than Elena made in a week. She moved between tables like a dancer, balancing plates and remembering orders without writing them down. The kitchen was loud tonight, with the chef shouting orders and servers rushing back and forth. Table 12 wanted their steaks medium rare. Table 6 needed more wine. Table 4 was complaining about the temperature. Elena handled it all with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this job for 3 years. She had learned to read people quickly, to know who would tip well and who would make her work extra hard for nothing. Tonight felt different, though. There was tension in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm. The hostess kept checking her phone and glancing nervously at the door. The manager had changed his tie twice and kept running his hands through his hair. Something big was happening, but Elena didn't have time to wonder what. At 8:30, 3 black cars pulled up outside. Elena could see them through the large windows that faced the street. The cars were the kind that important people rode, in with tinted windows and drivers who wore suits. The hostess straightened her dress and put on her biggest smile. The manager appeared from the back office, adjusting his tie one more time. The first man through the door was tall and lean, with silver hair and a watch that probably cost more than Elena's car. Behind him came 2 other men in identical dark suits, followed by a woman with perfect makeup and shoes that clicked against the marble floor like a metronome. But it was the 4th man who commanded everyone's attention. He wasn't the tallest or the loudest, but something about him made everyone in the restaurant turn and look. His suit was perfectly tailored, his shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and he carried himself like someone who owned everything he looked at. The hostess practically bowed as she led them to the best table in the house, the one with the view of the city lights and the piano. Elena had seen important people before, but this man was different. The way the manager rushed over to personally greet him, the way other diners whispered and pointed, the way even the kitchen staff peered through the service window to catch a glimpse. This wasn't just someone with money. This was someone with power. She watched from across the room as he settled into his chair like a king taking his throne. The woman with perfect makeup sat to his right, and the 2 men in suits flanked him like bodyguards. They ordered the most expensive wine on the menu without looking at the price, the kind of wine Elena had only heard about but never tasted. The manager assigned Elena to their table personally. It was an honor, he said, because she was his best server. But Elena knew better. She was chosen because she was pretty enough to impress important guests, but not pretty enough to be threatening. She was chosen because she knew how to be invisible when necessary and charming when required. She was chosen because she needed this job too much to risk making any mistakes. As she approached their table with water glasses and bread, Elena caught pieces of their conversation. They were talking about numbers that made her head spin. Millions of dollars moved around like pocket change. Companies bought and sold like trading cards. People's livelihoods discussed as if they were chess pieces on a board. The powerful man spoke in a calm, quiet voice that somehow commanded more attention than if he had shouted. His words were precise, calculated. He never repeated himself and never asked twice for anything. When he wanted something, it simply appeared. The wine, the bread, the attention of everyone in the room. Elena poured their water and explained the evening's specials, her voice steady, despite the way the man's eyes seemed to look right through her. He ordered for the entire table without consulting anyone else, choosing dishes that would take over an hour to prepare. This wasn't just dinner. This was a performance, and everyone in the restaurant was part of the audience. As the evening progressed, Elena noticed how the atmosphere in the restaurant changed. Conversations at other tables became quieter, more respectful. The staff moved more carefully, more precisely. Even the kitchen seemed to work with extra attention to detail. Everyone wanted to impress this man, though most didn't even know his name. But Elena had heard the whispers. She knew he was one of those people you read about in magazines, the kind who could buy and sell entire companies before breakfast, the kind who lived in a world so different from hers that they might as well be from different planets, the kind who probably never thought about medical bills or second jobs or dreams deferred. The piano in the corner seemed to watch everything with its silent keys, like an old friend Elena hadn't spoken to in years. Sometimes when the restaurant was quiet, she would walk past it and let her fingers brush against the lid. The touch always sent shivers up her arm, reminders of the music that still lived inside her, waiting for a chance to breathe again. Tonight, though, the piano would remain silent. Elena had tables to serve, bills to pay, and dreams to keep locked away for another day. She had learned long ago that survival meant focusing on what was real and immediate, not on the music that whispered in her heart when she thought no one was listening. As she refilled wine glasses and cleared plates, Elena had no idea that this night would change everything. She had no idea that the silent piano in the corner would soon become the center of a moment that would define the rest of her life. All she knew was that her feet hurt, her shift was almost over, and tomorrow she would do it all again. The evening was going smoothly until Elena made the mistake that would change her life forever. She was carrying a tray with 4 glasses of red wine, the expensive kind that cost $200 a bottle. The dining room was packed, and she had to weave between tables where important people discussed deals worth millions of dollars. Everything happened in slow motion. A man at table 7 pushed his chair back without looking. Elena tried to step around him, but her foot caught the leg of another chair. The tray tilted just slightly, and 3 tiny drops of wine landed on the white tablecloth at the billionaire's table. 3 drops. That was all. Most people wouldn't have even noticed, but this man noticed everything. The conversation at his table stopped immediately. The woman with perfect makeup gasped softly. The 2 men in suits looked up from their phones. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath as the billionaire stared down at the 3 small red stains on the pristine white cloth. Elena felt her heart drop into her stomach. In 3 years of working at Giovanni's, she had never spilled anything on a customer, not once. And of all the people in the restaurant, it had to be him, the most important, most powerful person who had ever walked through those doors. "I'm so sorry," Elena said immediately, reaching for her cleaning cloth. "Let me fix that right away. I'll get you a fresh tablecloth and—" "Stop." The word cut through the air like a knife. The billionaire didn't raise his voice, but somehow everyone in the restaurant heard him. Elena froze, her hand halfway to the table. "Step back." Elena took a step backward, her face burning with embarrassment. She could feel every pair of eyes in the restaurant watching her. The manager appeared at her shoulder like magic, his face pale with worry. "Sir, I apologize deeply for this incident," the manager said, practically bowing. "We'll comp your entire meal and—" "I wasn't talking to you." The billionaire's eyes never left Elena's face. "I was talking to her." He leaned back in his chair, studying Elena like she was an interesting specimen under a microscope. "Tell me, what's your name?" "Elena." "Sir?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Elena." He repeated her name slowly like he was tasting it. "How long have you been working here, Elena?" 3 years, sir." 3 years. He nodded thoughtfully. "And in those 3 years, have you ever spilled wine on a customer before?" Elena's throat felt dry. "No, sir. Never. Never." He smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a cat who had cornered a mouse. "So I'm special then. Lucky me." A few people at nearby tables chuckled nervously. Elena felt her cheeks burn even hotter. She wanted to disappear, to sink through the marble floor and never come back up. "You know what I think, Elena?" The billionaire continued, his voice carrying across the now silent restaurant. "I think you're not cut out for this job. I think you're careless, clumsy, a liability." The words hit Elena like physical blows. She had worked so hard for 3 years, never missed a shift, never complained, always smiled even when customers were rude. She took pride in her work, even if it wasn't the career she had dreamed of. "Sir, please," the manager tried again. "Elena is one of our best servers. This was just an accident." "An accident?" The billionaire laughed and the sound was sharp and cold. "Do you know what accidents cost in my world? Millions of dollars, thousands of jobs, people's entire livelihoods." He turned his attention back to Elena. "But I suppose someone like you wouldn't understand that, would you?" Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of all these people, not in front of him. "I understand more than you think," she said quietly, surprising herself with her own courage. The billionaire raised an eyebrow. "Oh, do you? Enlighten me then, what do you understand?" Elena's hands were shaking, but she forced herself to speak. "I understand what it's like to work hard for everything you have. I understand what it's like to care about doing your job well. I understand what it's like when every dollar matters." "How touching," the billionaire said with mock sympathy. "The poor waitress giving me a lecture about hard work." He looked around the restaurant, making sure everyone was listening. "Tell me, Elena, what else can you do besides carry trays? What other skills do you possess?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Elena could feel the weight of everyone's stares, the expectation of her humiliation. She thought about lying, about saying she had no other skills, about making herself small and hoping he would lose interest. But then she thought about her brother in the hospital, about the dreams she had given up, about the music that still lived in her heart even though she hadn't played in years. "I can play piano," she said, her voice stronger now. The billionaire's eyes lit up with interest, and Elena immediately regretted her honesty. "Piano?" He glanced over at the silent Steinway in the corner. "How convenient. We have a piano right here, and it looks like it needs some attention." He stood up from his chair, and his voice grew louder. "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears our clumsy waitress has hidden talents." The entire restaurant was watching now. Elena could see the other servers peeking out from the kitchen, the hostess craning her neck to get a better view. Even the busboys had stopped clearing tables. "I have an idea," the billionaire announced, spreading his arms wide like he was addressing a crowd. "Since Elena here thinks she understands hard work, let's give her a chance to prove it. Let's see if she can actually do something useful besides spill wine on paying customers." He walked over to the piano, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor. Elena followed reluctantly, feeling like she was walking to her own execution. "Here's the deal, Elena," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're going to play this piano for us. You're going to entertain my guests and everyone else in this restaurant. And you're going to keep playing until I decide you've proven your worth." Elena stared at the piano bench, her heart pounding. The instrument she had once loved now looked like an instrument of torture. "And if I refuse?" she asked quietly. The billionaire's smile was razor sharp. "Then you're fired." "Right," Here, right now, in front of all these witnesses. Your manager won't be able to save your job. And good luck finding another one when word gets around about how you disrespected one of the city's most important businessmen. Elena looked at the manager, hoping for support, but his face was pale and helpless. She looked at her fellow servers, but they couldn't meet her eyes. She was completely alone, trapped between the piano and the most powerful man she had ever met. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Finally, Elena walked to the piano bench and sat down. Her hands were shaking as she lifted the lid and exposed the black and white keys that had once been her closest friends. "Wonderful," the billionaire said, clapping his hands together. "This should be entertaining. Play something classical. Let's see if 3 years of carrying trays has made you forget how to use those fingers for something useful." Elena placed her trembling hands on the keys, acutely aware that her entire future hung in the balance of whatever happened next. Elena's fingers hovered over the piano keys like they were made of fire. The last time she had played was 4 years ago, at her father's funeral. She remembered that day clearly. The small church, the handful of mourners, and her final goodbye, played on an old upright piano that was missing 3 keys in the upper register. Now she sat at a concert quality, Steinway, in front of 50 strangers who were waiting for her to either succeed or fail spectacularly. The silence in the restaurant was so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. Even the kitchen had gone quiet, with servers and cooks peering through the service window to watch the drama unfold. "We're waiting," the billionaire said from behind her, his voice dripping with mock patience. "Surely you remember how to play something simple? Maybe Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star?" A few people laughed at his joke, and Elena felt her face burn with shame. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the feeling of music flowing through her fingers. When she was young, playing piano felt like breathing, natural, essential. But now her hands felt foreign and clumsy. She started with something safe, a simple Bach prelude she had learned when she was 12. Her fingers moved slowly at first, finding their way back to patterns they had once known by heart. The notes came out clean but mechanical, like she was reading from a textbook instead of making music. "Is that the best you can do?" the billionaire called out. "My 8-year-old nephew plays with more feeling than that." Elena tried to ignore him and continued playing, but his words had gotten under her skin. Her timing stuttered, and she hit a wrong note that rang out sharp and ugly in the perfect acoustics of the dining room. "Oh dear," the billionaire said with fake concern. "That didn't sound right at all. Perhaps you should try something more suited to your current skill level." Elena stopped playing and turned to look at him. He was standing with his arms crossed, looking pleased with himself. His dinner companions were watching with amused expressions, like they were at a comedy show instead of witnessing someone's humiliation. "What would you like me to play?" Elena asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "How about Chopin's Minute? Waltz?" he suggested with a cruel smile. "Oh wait, that might be too difficult. What about something by Mozart? Surely even a waitress can manage a simple sonata." Elena turned back to the piano. She knew the pieces he was asking for, had performed them in recitals when she was a teenager, but that felt like a lifetime ago. Her muscle memory was rusty, her confidence shattered. She began Mozart's Sonata in C major, a piece she had once played without thinking. But now every note felt like a struggle. Her left hand stumbled over the accompaniment, and she had to slow down to avoid making mistakes. "Faster," the billionaire commanded. Mozart didn't write it to be played like a funeral march. Elena tried to speed up, but the faster she played, the more mistakes she made. The notes began to blur together, and she could feel sweat forming on her forehead despite the restaurant's air conditioning. "Stop, stop, stop," the billionaire said, waving his hand dramatically. "This is painful to listen to. You're butchering one of the greatest composers who ever lived." Elena's hands fell to her sides. Around the restaurant, she could see people whispering to each other, some looking embarrassed for her, others seeming entertained by the spectacle. "Maybe we should try something more modern," the billionaire continued, clearly enjoying himself. "Do you know any popular songs? Something from the radio, perhaps? Surely that's more your speed." Elena felt tears threatening again, but she blinked them back. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She started playing a current pop song, simplifying the melody so she could manage it with her nervous fingers. "Boring," the billionaire declared after just a few bars. "No soul, no passion. You're playing like a robot." He walked closer to the piano, his presence looming over her like a dark cloud. "You know what I think, Elena? I think you lied about being able to play. I think you're a fraud, just like I suspected." "I'm not a fraud," Elena said quietly, still playing the simple melody. "Then prove it," he challenged. "Show me something real. Show me why anyone should care about your so-called talent." Elena's fingers stumbled again, and this time she stopped. Completely. The silence that followed was deafening. She could feel the weight of everyone's disappointment, their pity, their second-hand embarrassment. "I used to be good," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "Used to be," the billionaire repeated mockingly. "How sad. Another person who peaked in high school and never amounted to anything." Those words hit Elena like a physical blow. She thought about her teenage years, when music teachers told her she had real potential. She remembered the acceptance letter to the conservatory that she had to turn down when her father got sick. She remembered the dreams she had buried, so deep she had almost forgotten they existed. "You don't know anything about me," Elena said, turning to face him. "I know everything I need to know," he replied coldly. "You're a waitress who spills wine and pretends to have talent she doesn't possess. You're exactly what I expected. Mediocre." The word mediocre hung in the air like a curse. Elena had been called many things in her life, but never that. Even when she was struggling, even when she had to give up music, she had never thought of herself as mediocre. "Play something else," the billionaire demanded. "And this time, try not to embarrass yourself further." Elena turned back to the piano, her hands shaking with a mixture of fear and growing anger. She started another classical piece, but her heart wasn't in it. She was just going through the motions, playing notes without meaning, music without soul. "Pathetic," the billionaire said after a few minutes. "Absolutely pathetic. Is this what passes for talent these days?" He addressed the restaurant like he was giving a speech. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is what happens when people have delusions of grandeur. This young woman thought she could impress us with her musical abilities, but instead she's proven that some people are destined for nothing more than serving others." Elena continued playing, but she could barely see the keys through her tears. Every note felt like another nail in the coffin of her self-respect. She wanted to stop, to run away, to disappear forever. "Keep playing," the billionaire ordered when she slowed down. "We're not done here. I want everyone to see what happens when people try to be something they're not." The other diners were getting uncomfortable now. Some were looking away, unable to watch the cruelty continue. Others were checking their phones or whispering among themselves. But nobody stood up to defend her. Nobody told the billionaire to stop. Elena realized that this was her life now, playing background music while people ignored her pain, serving others while her own dreams died a slow death. She was trapped at this piano just like she was trapped in this job, going through the motions while the person she used to be faded away completely. The billionaire walked around the piano, studying her like a predator circling wounded prey. "You know what's really sad, Elena? You actually believed you were special. You actually thought you had something valuable to offer the world." Elena's playing grew quieter and more hesitant. She was running out of pieces she could remember, running out of strength to continue this humiliation. "One more song," the billionaire announced to the room. "Let's give our failed pianist one final chance to redeem herself before we put her out of her misery." Elena sat at the piano bench, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Her hands rested limply on her lap, no longer even pretending to play. The billionaire's words echoed in her mind like poison. Mediocre, pathetic, failed pianist. Maybe he was right. Maybe she really was nothing more than a waitress who had fooled herself into thinking she had talent. The restaurant felt like a courtroom where she had already been found guilty. The silence was heavy with judgment and pity. She could feel the eyes of 50 strangers boring into her back, waiting for her final humiliation. Some looked away in embarrassment, others whispered behind their hands, but nobody moved to help her. "Well," the billionaire said, his voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. "We're all waiting for your grand finale. Surely you have one. More performance in you before we end this sad little show." Elena closed her eyes and tried to find some fragment of the person she used to be. Somewhere deep inside, buried under years of exhaustion and compromise, was the girl who had played piano like it was the most natural thing in the world. The girl who had made her father cry with joy when she performed at her first recital. The girl who had dreamed of concert halls and standing ovations. But that girl felt like a stranger now. That girl had died slowly over the past 4 years, suffocated by medical bills and double shifts and the weight of keeping her family together. Elena wasn't even sure she remembered how that girl used to feel. "I'm waiting," the billionaire said, again his impatience growing. "Don't tell me you're giving up now just when things were getting interesting." Elena opened her eyes and stared at the piano keys. They looked different now, not like the friends they had once been, but like a test she was destined to fail. Her hands felt heavy and useless, disconnected from the music that had once flowed through them like electricity. Then something unexpected happened. In the corner of her vision, she saw one of the busboys, a young kid named Carlos who reminded her of her brother. He was standing by the kitchen door, and when their eyes met, he gave her the smallest nod of encouragement. It wasn't much, but it was the first sign of kindness she had received all evening. That tiny gesture sparked something inside Elena. Not hope exactly, but a flicker of defiance. She thought about her brother lying in a hospital bed fighting for his life while she sat here being humiliated by a man who had never struggled for anything. She thought about all the nights she had worked until her feet bled, all the dreams she had sacrificed, all the pain she had swallowed in silence. The billionaire was still talking, making jokes at her expense for the entertainment of his wealthy friends, but his words began to fade into background noise as Elena felt something stirring in her chest. It wasn't the confident musician she used to be, but it wasn't the defeated waitress either. It was something new, something that had been forged in the fire of real struggle. Her hands moved to the keys almost without her conscious decision, but instead of starting another classical piece or popular song, she found herself playing something different. It was a melody that had been living in her heart for years, something she had never shared with anyone. It had started as a lullaby she hummed to herself during the hardest nights, when her brother was in pain and the bills were piling up and the future looked impossibly dark. The first few notes were tentative, barely audible above the ambient noise of the restaurant. But as Elena continued playing, something amazing began to happen. The melody began to grow and evolve, becoming more complex and beautiful with each passing moment. It wasn't perfect. Her technique was still rusty and her timing occasionally wavered. But there was something in the music that hadn't been there before. There was truth. The billionaire stopped talking mid-sentence, caught off guard by this unexpected turn. This wasn't another rehearsed classical piece or a simplified pop song. This was something original, something that came from a place deeper than technical skill or formal training. Elena wasn't thinking about the audience anymore, or the billionaire's cruel words, or even her fear of losing her job. She was thinking about her brother's smile when she used to play for him. She was thinking about her father, who had worked 3 jobs to pay for her piano lessons. She was thinking about every person who had ever believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. The melody grew stronger, more confident. Her left hand found its rhythm, providing a foundation that supported the delicate beauty of the main theme. The music spoke of pain, yes, but also of resilience. It spoke of dreams deferred but not forgotten. It spoke of love that persists, even in the darkest times. Around the restaurant, conversations began to quiet. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Phones were lowered. Even the kitchen staff had stopped their work to listen. There was something in Elena's playing that commanded attention in a way that her earlier performances hadn't. This wasn't just music. It was communication, pure and honest and real. The billionaire's expression had changed from smug satisfaction to confusion, then to something that might have been surprise. He wasn't used to being upstaged, especially not by someone he had dismissed as insignificant. His dinner companions had stopped listening to his commentary and were focusing entirely on the piano. Elena's playing grew more passionate as the melody developed. She added harmonies that spoke of complexity beneath simplicity, rhythms that suggested struggle and triumph intertwined. Her hands, which had felt so clumsy and uncertain just minutes before, now moved with growing confidence across the keys. The music told a story without words. It was the story of a young woman who had sacrificed her dreams for her family. It was the story of long nights and aching feet and bills that never seemed to end. But it was also the story of love that didn't ask for anything in return, of strength that grew from necessity, of beauty that could bloom even in the harshest conditions. As the melody built toward its climax, Elena felt tears streaming down her face. But these weren't tears of shame or defeat. They were tears of recognition, of rediscovering a part of herself she thought she had lost forever. The music was pouring out of her like water from a broken dam, years of suppressed emotion finally finding its voice. The billionaire tried to interrupt, opening his mouth to make another cutting remark, but something in the music stopped him. Even his cruelty seemed small and petty in the face of Elena's raw honesty. The entire restaurant had fallen under the spell of her playing, drawn into the story she was telling without words. Elena's hands moved across the keys with increasing intensity, building to a moment that would change everything. The melody was approaching its crescendo, the point where all the pain and beauty and struggle would come together in perfect harmony. She could feel it building like a wave, gathering power and momentum. The restaurant held its breath, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. Even the billionaire had stopped talking, his attention caught despite himself by the power of Elena's music. The moment balanced on a knife's edge, ready to tip toward triumph or tragedy. Elena closed her eyes and let the music carry her toward whatever came next. Elena's fingers pressed into the keys with a force that came from somewhere deeper than muscle memory. The melody she had been building reached its peak, and suddenly the entire restaurant was transformed. What had started as her personal lullaby had become something universal, something that spoke to every person who had ever felt small or forgotten or pushed down by someone more powerful. The music filled every corner of the dining room. It floated past the crystal chandeliers, wrapped around the marble columns, and settled into the hearts of everyone listening. This wasn't the background music you ignored during dinner. This was the kind of music that made you stop everything and pay attention. That reminded you why humans created art in the first place. At table 12, an elderly woman had tears streaming down her cheeks. She was thinking about her own daughter, who had given up violin lessons 50 years ago to help support the family. At table 6, a businessman loosened his tie and felt his chest tighten with emotion he hadn't experienced since his wedding day. Even the teenagers at table 3 had put down their phones and were listening with wide, amazed eyes. But it was the silence that followed the final note that truly changed everything. Elena lifted her hands from the piano and sat perfectly, still her eyes closed, her breath coming in shallow gasps. For a moment, the entire restaurant existed in a bubble of perfect quiet. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody even seemed to breathe. Then, slowly, like the first drops of rain before a storm, the applause began. It started with the elderly woman at table 12, who began clapping with slow, deliberate appreciation. Then the businessman joined her, his applause stronger and more enthusiastic. Within seconds, the entire restaurant erupted in thunderous clapping that seemed to shake the crystal glasses on every table. People weren't just clapping politely like they might at a hotel lounge. They were standing up, cheering, whistling. Some were crying openly. Others were shouting bravo like they were at Carnegie Hall instead of a downtown restaurant. The kitchen staff had come out from behind the service window and were applauding along with everyone else. Elena opened her eyes in shock. She had expected awkward silence, maybe a few polite claps. She had certainly never expected this. The sound of genuine appreciation washed over her like warm water, healing wounds she didn't even know she had. But the most amazing thing was what she saw when she looked at the billionaire. For the first time all evening, he was speechless. His mouth hung slightly open, his face pale with surprise. The cruel smile that had been his constant expression was completely gone, replaced by something that looked almost like wonder. His dinner companions were applauding enthusiastically. but he just stood there, frozen in place. The applause continued for what felt like forever. Elena stood up from the piano bench on shaky legs, not sure what to do with herself. She had never received a standing ovation before, had never felt the rush of connecting with an audience through music. It was better than any drug, more satisfying than any paycheck. Then something extraordinary happened. A distinguished man in his 70s approached the piano, moving carefully through the crowd of applauding diners. Elena recognized him vaguely. He was a regular customer who always ordered the salmon and read classical music magazines while he ate. "Excuse me, miss," he said, extending a business card with hands that shook slightly with age. "My name is Robert Chen. I'm the music director for the City Symphony Orchestra." Elena's heart stopped. She had heard of Robert Chen. Every classical musician in the city knew his name. "That was extraordinary," he continued, his voice warm with genuine admiration. "Absolutely extraordinary. I haven't heard anything that moving in years. Who composed that piece?" I did," Elena stammered, hardly believing the words coming out of her own mouth. "You composed that?" Robert's eyes widened. "My dear, that was magnificent. Tell me, have you had formal training?" "Some," Elena said, still in shock. "A long time ago." "We need to talk," Robert said firmly. "The symphony has a program for emerging composers, and I think you would be perfect for it. There's also a scholarship available for advanced study. Would you be interested?" Before Elena could answer, another person approached. This time it was a woman in her 40s with stylish glasses and an expensive purse. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, "but I'm Diana Foster from Foster Entertainment. We represent musicians and composers for film and television. That piece you just played would be perfect for a movie score I'm working on. Are you available for freelance work?" Elena felt dizzy. 2 hours ago, she had been worried about getting fired from her waitressing job. Now she had a symphony director and a Hollywood agent asking to work with her. More people began approaching the piano. A recording studio owner who wanted to discuss a demo, a music teacher who ran a prestigious academy, a wealthy patron of the arts who supported promising young musicians. Each person pressed a business card into Elena's trembling hands. Through it all, the billionaire stood frozen at his table, watching his perfect evening of entertainment turn into something he couldn't control. His companions were more interested in the musician than in his business deals. His carefully orchestrated display of power had backfired completely. Finally, he found his voice. "Wait just a minute," he called out, trying to regain control of the situation. "Let's not get carried away here. She's still just a waitress who spilled wine on my table." The words fell flat in the transformed atmosphere of the restaurant. People turned to look at him with expressions of disgust and disappointment. His own dinner companion seemed embarrassed by his behavior. Robert Chen turned to face the billionaire directly. "Sir, I don't know who you are, but that young lady has more talent in her little finger than most people have in their entire bodies. If you can't recognize genius when you hear it, that says more about you than it does about her." The elderly woman from table 12 stood up and spoke in a clear, strong voice. "I've been coming to this restaurant for 15 years, and I've never been more moved by anything I've heard here. That young woman is extraordinary." Other diners began nodding and voicing their agreement. The billionaire found himself surrounded by people who had witnessed his cruelty and were no longer impressed by his wealth or power. Elena looked around at all the faces turned toward her. Some she recognized from serving them dinner. Others were complete strangers. But all of them were looking at her with respect, with admiration, with recognition of something valuable that she had almost forgotten she possessed. The manager of the restaurant, who had been silent during the entire ordeal, finally stepped forward. "Elena," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I owe you an apology, and you don't have to worry about your job. After tonight, I think you might not need it much longer." Elena smiled through her tears. For the first time in 4 years, she felt like herself again, not the tired waitress or the struggling sister or the girl who gave up her dreams. She felt like Elena the musician, Elena the composer, Elena the artist who had something important to share with the world. The billionaire gathered his things and left the restaurant with his embarrassed companions, but Elena barely noticed. She was too busy planning her future, too busy thinking about music lessons and compositions and all the possibilities that had suddenly opened up before her. Sometimes, she realized, the moments that seem like your worst disasters turn out to be the doors to your greatest triumphs. All you have to do is find the courage to walk through them.